Blood sprayed across Cordelia Everhart's face as her stepfather slumped to the floor, his final curse dying on his lips. The pistol in her trembling hands felt impossibly heavy, the echo of the gunshot still ringing in her ears as she stared down at the man who had tormented her for the past 8 years. The year was 1873, and at 22, Cordelia had endured more suffering than most would know in a lifetime. Ever since her mother's death, Winston Tate had transformed their small Texas farmhouse into a prison of fear and pain. She dropped the gun as if it had suddenly caught fire, backing away from the corpse. Blood pooled beneath him, seeping into the worn floorboards, forever staining the small house that had witnessed so many of her tears. In the fading light of dusk, the reality of what she had done began to settle over her like a shroud. He was going to kill me, she whispered to the empty room, her voice barely audible. The bruises around her neck were already darkening, evidence of his final rage, but no one would see it that way. A woman who killed her husband, even a stepfather, would hang, especially one with no witnesses to her years of torment. Panic seized her as she realized she had mere hours before someone might come calling. With shaking hands, she gathered the few possessions she could not bear to leave behind. Her mother's silver locket, a small bundle of clothes, and the meager savings she had managed to hide from Winston's greedy fingers. The night air hit her face as she stepped outside, the vast Texas landscape stretching before her. Freedom should have tasted sweet, but all she could taste was fear. She had no plan beyond putting as much distance between herself and the farmhouse as possible. Cordelia walked through the night, following the North Star. By dawn, her feet were blistered and bleeding in her worn boots, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the terror that drove her forward. Every snapping twig made her jump, convinced that the law was already on her trail. For 3 days she traveled, sleeping in brief, fitful bursts beneath the shelter of trees or in abandoned barns. Her food ran out on the second day, and thirst became her constant companion. She avoided the main roads and settlements, choosing instead to follow creek beds and game trails. On the 4th day, as the relentless Texas sun beat down upon her, Cordelia's strength finally faltered. Dehydration and exhaustion conspired against her, and she collapsed beneath the sparse shade of a mesquite tree. As consciousness slipped away, she thought she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. When she opened her eyes again, the world around her was different. She was lying on a real bed with clean sheets. Panic surged through her as she realized she was inside a house. Had she been found? Was the sheriff waiting to take her to the gallows? Cordelia bolted upright, her vision swimming from the sudden movement. The room spun around her, and a cry escaped her lips. Her body shook with fear as footsteps approached from beyond the door. A tall figure appeared in the doorway, broad-shouldered and imposing in the dim light. A cowboy, with a weather-beaten face that had seen its share of hardship. His eyes, however, held no malice, only concern. "You're not in that house anymore," the cowboy said, his voice low and gentle, as if speaking to a spooked horse. "You're safe here." "Where am I?" Cordelia managed to ask, her throat painfully dry. "My ranch. Name's Owen Lockhart." He stepped forward, offering her a cup of water. "Found you half dead about 5 miles south of here." Cordelia accepted the water with trembling hands, watching him warily as she drank. Are you turning me in?" The question seemed to confuse him. "Turning you in for what?" "Being foolish enough to wander the desert without proper supplies." His expression softened. "Whatever you're running from, it's not my business unless you make it so." Relief washed over her, but wariness remained. Men, in her experience, never offered help without expecting something in return. "I can't stay," she said, trying to swing her legs over the side of the bed. Her muscles screamed in protest. "You can barely stand," Owen countered. "At least stay until you've got your strength back. My ranch hand's wife, Martha, has been looking after you. She'll be glad to see you awake." Before Cordelia could argue further, a plump, middle-aged woman bustled into the room, her face lighting up at the sight of Cordelia sitting upright. "Oh, thank the Lord," Martha exclaimed. "We were beginning to worry you'd never wake up, child. How long have I been here?" Cordelia asked, suddenly alarmed. 2 days, Owen answered. "You were in a bad way when I found you. 2 days lost, 2 days during which someone might have found Winston's body, 2 days for a posse to form. I need to leave, Cordelia insisted, more forcefully this time. Martha and Owen exchanged glances. At least stay for a proper meal, Martha suggested. You're nothing but skin and bones. The mention of food made Cordelia's stomach growl audibly, betraying her. Owen nodded, seemingly satisfied. I'll leave you to get dressed. Martha brought some of her daughter's clothes for you. They should fit well enough. He moved toward the door. Take your time. No one's chasing you here. If only he knew how wrong he was. After Owen left, Martha helped Cordelia into a simple blue cotton dress that was slightly too large but clean and whole, unlike her own tattered clothing. That man's a blessing, Martha said, as she helped Cordelia brush her tangled auburn hair. Found him myself 7 years ago, half dead after Comanches attacked his wagon train. My husband and I nursed him back to health, and he's been good to us ever since. Gave Thomas a job when no one else would hire a black ranch hand. Cordelia listened silently, absorbing this information about her rescuer while mentally calculating her next move. He's a good man, Martha continued. Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, been alone too long if you ask me. I'm not looking for a man, Cordelia said sharply. Martha's eyes widened slightly. I didn't mean to suggest. I just meant he's trustworthy. Whatever you're running from, you're safe here. The kindness in the woman's voice nearly undid Cordelia. She'd had so little of it in recent years that she hardly knew how to respond. She merely nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. Martha led her to the kitchen, where Owen was setting the table. The ranch house was modest but well built, with large windows that let in the afternoon light. It was clear Owen Lockhart was not wealthy, but he wasn't poor either, a man who had worked hard for what he had. Thomas, Martha's husband, joined them for the meal, a hearty beef stew with fresh baked bread. Cordelia ate cautiously at first, then with increasing hunger as her empty stomach demanded more. Where were you headed? Owen asked finally, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen over the table. Cordelia set down her spoon, choosing her words carefully. North, maybe to Colorado. That's a long way for a woman alone, Thomas observed, especially on foot. I didn't have much choice, she replied, offering no further explanation. Owen studied her for a moment. Well, the nearest town is Redemption, about 20 miles east. I'll be heading there for supplies in 2 days if you'd like a ride. 20 miles. It might as well have been 1,000 to her aching body. And a town meant people, questions, perhaps even law enforcement. But she couldn't impose on this man's hospitality forever, nor could she continue on foot without supplies. Thank you, she said finally. That would be kind. Owen nodded, seemingly satisfied with this arrangement. Until then, you're welcome to rest here. Martha and Thomas live in the small house just down the hill. They'll be around if you need anything when I'm out with the herd. That night, alone in the guest bedroom, Cordelia finally allowed herself to weep for her mother, for the girl she had once been, for the life that had brought her to this point. She wept until she had no tears left, then lay awake staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, wondering how long her freedom would last. The next morning, Cordelia woke to sunlight streaming through the window. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was, panic seizing her until she remembered Owen Lockhart's ranch, miles away from Winston's body. She dressed quickly in the borrowed clothes and ventured outside. The ranch was larger than she'd initially thought, a main house, a bunkhouse that seemed empty, several corrals, and a large barn. Beyond these structures stretched fenced pastureland where cattle grazed in the distance. She found Owen by the barn, saddling a horse. He looked up at her approach, nodding in greeting. Morning, he said. Feeling better? Yes, thank you. Cordelia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly unsure. I was wondering if there was something I could do to earn my keep while I'm here. Owen raised an eyebrow. You don't need to earn anything. You're a guest. I don't take charity, she replied stiffly. Pride was one of the few things Winston hadn't managed to take from her. Owen studied her for a moment, then nodded. Martha could use help with the washing and mending if you've a mind for it. Or there's always work in the garden. I can do both, Cordelia said quickly, and I'm handy with cooking as well. I won't turn down a home-cooked meal, Owen said with the ghost of a smile, but don't push yourself too hard. You're still recovering. With that, he mounted his horse and rode off toward the cattle, leaving Cordelia to find Martha and offer her assistance. The older woman welcomed the help gladly, and soon Cordelia was up to her elbows in soapy water, washing linens while Martha kneaded bread dough. "How long have you worked for Mr. Lockhart?" Cordelia asked, trying to learn more about the man who had saved her life. "Going on 7 years now," Martha replied. "Thomas and I came west after the war, looking for a fresh start. Wasn't easy finding folks willing to hire a black man, but Owen didn't hesitate. Said he judged men by their work, not their color. He seems unusual," Cordelia ventured. Martha chuckled. "That he is. Fought for the Union during the war, though most ranchers around these parts favored the Confederacy. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's fair and generous with what he has." She paused, glancing at Cordelia. "He's never brought a woman back to the ranch before. Thomas and I were quite surprised." Cordelia felt her cheeks warm. "He only helped me because I was in trouble. There's nothing more to it." "Of course," Martha agreed, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "Still, it's nice to see him taking an interest in something besides cattle and horses." Throughout the day, Cordelia found herself watching for Owen's return, telling herself it was merely because she needed to know her rescuer's routines if she was to avoid detection. When he finally rode back at dusk, she was in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal from the supplies Martha had provided. Owen looked surprised to find her there, the table set and food nearly ready. He removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door, running a hand through his sun-lightened brown hair. "You didn't have to do this," he said, washing his hands in the basin. "I wanted to," Cordelia replied, suddenly feeling awkward in the domestic scene. "It's nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread. Beats what I usually manage," he said, taking a seat. "Much obliged." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the scrape of utensils and the distant lowing of cattle. Owen was not a man who felt the need to fill silence with idle chatter, and Cordelia appreciated that. Winston had always talked incessantly, especially when drunk, his words growing more vicious with each glass of whiskey. "May I ask you something?" Owen said finally, breaking into her thoughts. Cordelia tensed. "You can ask. I might not answer." He nodded, accepting this condition. "What are you running from?" She set down her fork, appetite suddenly gone. "What makes you think I'm running from something? Found you half dead in the middle of nowhere with no supplies and no horse. You've been watching the horizon like you expect riders to appear any minute, and you flinch every time I make a sudden move." His eyes held her steadily. "I'm not prying for details. Just want to know if there's trouble that might follow you here." Cordelia considered lying but found she didn't have the energy for it. "Yes," she admitted, "there might be trouble. That's why I should leave as soon as possible. Is it the law you're worried about or something else? Does it matter? It might." Owen leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. "If it's outlaws, I've got rifles and Thomas is a crack shot. If it's the law..." He paused. "Well, that depends on what you did." Cordelia's hands trembled slightly. "I killed a man," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "My stepfather. He was going to kill me, had his hands around my throat, and I shot him." She waited for the disgust, the judgment, the immediate withdrawal of his hospitality. Instead, Owen simply nodded. "Self-defense, then," he said quietly. "Was there anyone who witnessed what happened? Anyone who could vouch for you?" Cordelia shook her head. "No, it was just the two of us in that house. It has been for years, since my mother died." "And he hurt you, before that night?" Her hand unconsciously went to her neck, where faint bruises still lingered. "Yes, for years." Owen was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood, taking his plate to the wash basin. "Finish your supper, you'll need your strength." "You're still willing to help me get to town?" Cordelia asked, disbelieving. "I'm willing to help you stay alive," he corrected. "Town might not be the safest place for you right now. Let me think on it overnight." With that, he bid her good night and retired to his room, leaving Cordelia to wonder at the strange man who had not only saved her life, but now seemed willing to protect her from the consequences of her actions. That night, Cordelia dreamed of Winston. In her dream, he rose from the floor, blood still pouring from the wound in his chest, his hands reaching for her throat once more. She woke gasping, clawing at phantom fingers around her neck, a scream caught in her throat. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the unfamiliar room. For a moment, disoriented by fear, she couldn't remember where she was. Then reality returned. Owen Lockhart's ranch, miles from Winston's body. Sleep evaded her after that. She sat by the window, watching as the stars wheeled overhead, wondering what the morning would bring. Would Owen reconsider during the night? Would he decide that harboring a killer was too great a risk? Dawn was just breaking when a sound caught her attention: hoofbeats approaching the ranch. Cold fear washed over her as she peered through the window, trying to make out the riders in the dim light. 3 men on horseback, moving with purpose toward the main house. Panic seized her. Had they found her already? Was it the sheriff and his deputies, come to drag her back to face justice? She scrambled to gather her few possessions, mind racing to find an escape route. But before she could formulate a plan, a soft knock came at her door. "Cordelia?" Owen's voice was low and urgent. "Are you awake?" She opened the door to find him fully dressed, a rifle in hand. "There are men coming," she whispered. "I know," he replied grimly. "Stay here out of sight. I'll handle this." "But trust me," he said, his eyes holding hers for a moment before he turned away. Trust was not something that came easily to Cordelia, not after years of Winston's betrayal and cruelty. But she found herself nodding, stepping back into the room as Owen went to meet the approaching riders. From the window, she watched as Owen walked out onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. The 3 men reined in their horses a respectful distance from the house. "Morning, Lockhart," called the lead rider, a man whose voice carried the authority of law. "Awful early for a social call, Sheriff Davis," Owen acknowledged. "What brings you out this way, Sheriff?" The words sent a fresh wave of terror through Cordelia. She pressed herself against the wall beside the window, heart pounding so loudly she was certain they could hear it outside. "Looking for someone," the sheriff replied. "Woman, early 20s, auburn hair, killed her stepfather 4 days ago near Willow Creek. Thought you might have seen her, being as how you're on the main route north." "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Owen said, his voice betraying nothing. "But I'll keep an eye out. This woman dangerous," shot Winston Tate in the chest with his own revolver, the sheriff said. "So I'd say approach with caution if you spot her." "What's her name?" Owen asked, and Cordelia held her breath. "Cordelia Everhart, though she might be using her mother's maiden name Ellis, I believe." "I'll remember that," Owen said. "You boys want some coffee before you head out?" "Martha just brewed a fresh pot." "Appreciate the offer, but we've got ground to cover," the sheriff declined. "If you see anything, send word to town." "Will do," Owen promised. Cordelia remained frozen until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Only then did she allow herself to breathe again, slumping against the wall as her legs threatened to give out beneath her. The door opened, and Owen stepped inside. His face was grave as he set the rifle aside. "They're gone," he said. "For now." "You lied to them," Cordelia whispered. "Why?" Owen was quiet for a long moment. "Something doesn't sit right about this," he finally said. "Sheriff didn't mention anything about self-defense or the circumstances, just that you killed your stepfather." "They won't believe me," Cordelia said bitterly. A woman's word against a dead man's reputation. Winston was well liked in town. No one knew what he was like behind closed doors. Owen's jaw tightened. "I've known men like that, all charm in public, monsters in private." "What happens now?" Cordelia asked, dreading the answer. "Now we need to get you somewhere safe," Owen replied. "Somewhere they won't think to look. You're still willing to help me, even knowing the law is after me." Owen met her gaze steadily. "I believe you," he said simply, "and I don't much care what the law says when it's wrong." His words struck Cordelia with unexpected force. To be believed, to have someone take her side, it was a feeling so foreign she hardly knew how to respond. "Why?" she managed to ask. "Why help someone you barely know?" A shadow passed over Owen's face. "Let's just say I know something about being judged unfairly." He moved toward the door. "Pack whatever you have. We leave in an hour." As Owen left the room, Cordelia found herself staring after him. wondering at the complex man who had not only saved her life, but now seemed determined to risk his own to protect her. For the first time since pulling the trigger on Winston's pistol, she felt a flicker of something other than fear, a dangerous, fragile hope. Within the hour, Owen had 2 horses saddled and supplies packed. He'd explained the situation to Martha and Thomas, who had surprised Cordelia by offering prayers and good wishes rather than judgment. Martha had even packed food for their journey, pressing a small bundle of dried herbs into Cordelia's hand with instructions for brewing tea to help with sleep. "Where are we going?" Cordelia asked as Owen helped her mount a gentle mare. "I have a hunting cabin in the foothills," Owen replied, swinging up onto his own horse. "It's remote, hard to find if you don't know it's there. We can stay until we figure out what to do next." "We," Cordelia echoed. "You don't have to come with me, you've done enough already." Owen's expression softened slightly. "Sheriff knows my face. If anyone saw you at the ranch and word gets back to him, I'm already implicated. Besides, you wouldn't find the cabin on your own." It was logical, but Cordelia sensed there was more to it, something Owen wasn't saying. Still, she was in no position to refuse his help, and the thought of facing the wilderness alone again filled her with dread. They rode north, avoiding the main trails and keeping to the cover of trees and gullies where possible. Owen was a skilled tracker, frequently checking their back trail for signs of pursuit. He spoke little as they rode, but his presence was reassuring, solid, and watchful. By midday, they had entered more rugged country, the flat plains giving way to rolling hills and scattered pine forests. The air grew cooler as they climbed, a welcome relief from the Texas heat. Cordelia, unaccustomed to long hours in the saddle, was grateful when Owen called a halt by a small creek. "We'll rest the horses," he said, dismounting, "and ourselves." Cordelia slid from her saddle, wincing as her sore muscles protested. Owen pretended not to notice, busy with unsaddling the horses, but he did produce a small jar of salve from his saddlebags. "Martha's remedy for saddle sores," he explained, handing it to her. "Works wonders." "Thank you," Cordelia said, touched by the thoughtfulness. They shared a simple meal of jerky and biscuits, sitting in the dappled shade of a cottonwood tree. The quiet between them was comfortable, punctuated only by the gurgle of the creek and the occasional call of a bird. "May I ask you something?" Cordelia ventured finally. Owen looked up from checking his rifle. "Fair's fair," he said. "I asked you a personal question yesterday. You mentioned knowing something about being judged unfairly," she said carefully. "What did you mean?" A shadow crossed Owen's face, and for a moment Cordelia thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, setting the rifle aside. "I was accused of something I didn't do," he said, his voice low. "During the war, I was a scout for the Union Army, tasked with finding safe passage for our troops through hostile territory. One night, our commanding officer was found dead, shot in the back. I was the only one who'd argued with him earlier that day, so naturally, suspicion fell on me." He paused, his eyes on the distant horizon. "I was court-martialed, but before they could reach a verdict, Confederates attacked our camp. In the chaos, I escaped. Spent the rest of the war as a fugitive, even though I was fighting for the same side." "What happened to the real killer?" Cordelia asked. "Never found out," Owen admitted. "By the time the war ended, it didn't much matter anymore. I was already labeled a deserter and a murderer. Easier to start fresh out west where no one knew my name." "I'm sorry," Cordelia said softly, understanding now why he had been willing to believe her story so readily. Owen shrugged. "It was a long time ago. I've made peace with it." He stood, signaling an end to the conversation. "We should keep moving. Still a few hours to the cabin." They continued their journey through increasingly rugged terrain. The trail, such as it was, would have been impossible for Cordelia to follow on her own, winding through narrow passes and across rocky slopes that left no trace of their passing. By late afternoon, they reached a small, sheltered valley nestled between 2 ridges. A simple log cabin stood beside a clear mountain stream, nearly hidden by surrounding pines. "It's not much," Owen said as they approached, "but it's solid and dry." "It's perfect," Cordelia replied honestly. After days of fear and flight, the isolated cabin seemed like a sanctuary. The interior was rustic, but clean a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a small cupboard containing basic supplies, and a narrow bed in the corner. Owen immediately set about lighting a fire while Cordelia unsaddled the horses, grateful for the familiar task that kept her hands busy and her mind focused. As darkness fell, the cabin grew warm and surprisingly cozy. Owen prepared a simple stew from supplies they had brought, and they ate in companionable silence, the events of the day catching up with them both. "You take the bed," Owen said as they finished their meal. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I can't take your bed," Cordelia protested. "It's not mine more than yours," Owen replied, "and you need the rest more than I do." Too exhausted to argue further, Cordelia accepted his generosity. The bed, though narrow and somewhat lumpy, felt like luxury after nights spent on the hard ground. She fell asleep to the sound of Owen banking the fire, feeling safer than she had in years. She woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. For a moment, disoriented by yet another unfamiliar place, panic seized her. Then she remembered the cabin, the mountains, Owen. She sat up, looking around the small room. He was gone, but the fire had been rebuilt and a pot of coffee simmered at its edge. Beside it was a plate with strips of bacon and a note scrawled on a scrap of paper. "Gone hunting, back by noon." The domesticity of it struck Cordelia with unexpected force. When was the last time someone had prepared breakfast for her? Certainly not Winston, who had expected to be served and flew into a rage if his meals weren't ready when he wanted them. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, then set about making herself useful. The cabin, while not dirty, could use a woman's touch. She swept the rough plank floor, organized the supplies in the cupboard, and washed the few dishes they had used. Outside, she found a small garden plot that had been neglected but not abandoned. Weeds had overtaken most of it, but a few hardy herbs and vegetables still struggled through. Cordelia spent the morning clearing the weeds and salvaging what plants she could, grateful for the mindless physical labor that kept darker thoughts at bay. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't hear Owen's approach until he was nearly beside her. She startled, hand flying to her throat in a reflexive gesture of protection. "Sorry," Owen said quickly, stepping back to give her space. "Didn't mean to frighten you." "It's all right," Cordelia replied, embarrassed by her reaction. "I was just lost in thought." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. Over his shoulder was a brace of rabbits, the fruits of his morning hunt. "You've been busy," he observed, looking at the half-cleared garden. "Seemed ashamed to let it go to waste," Cordelia said. "There's still some good herbs here, thyme and sage at least. And a few carrots that might be worth saving." "Haven't had much time for gardening lately," Owen admitted, "or much inclination for it. I've always found it peaceful," Cordelia said, surprising herself with the personal admission. "Even when." She trailed off, unwilling to speak of her life with Winston. "Even when everything else was chaos," Owen suggested gently. "Yes," she agreed, grateful for his understanding. "Exactly that." He helped her finish clearing the small plot, then showed her a nearby spring where wild onions grew. Together, they prepared a stew for the evening meal, working around each other in the small cabin with an ease that belied their short acquaintance. As they ate, Owen outlined his plan. "We'll stay here a week or so, let the initial search die down. Then I'll go into the nearest town, Pinewood, about a day's ride from here, and listen for news, see if they're still looking for you or if they've moved on." "And if they're still looking," Cordelia asked. Owen considered this. "Then we have options. We could head further west, maybe to Arizona Territory or even California, or north to Colorado or Wyoming, places where a woman with a past might start fresh." "We," Cordelia repeated. "You keep saying we, but this isn't your burden to bear, Owen." He met her gaze steadily. "Maybe I want to bear it." The simple statement hung between them, charged with meaning Cordelia wasn't ready to examine too closely. She looked away first, focusing on the flames dancing in the fireplace. "I can't ask that of you," she said finally. "You have a ranch, a life. I won't be the reason you lose those things. The ranch will keep," Owen replied. "Thomas knows how to run things in my absence, and as for a life..." He paused. "Well, it's been a solitary one for a long time now. Maybe it's time for a change." Cordelia didn't know how to respond to that. The idea that this man, this virtual stranger, would consider uprooting his life for her was both terrifying and oddly warming. No one had put her needs first in so long that she hardly knew how to accept such consideration. "Let's take it one day at a time," she suggested. "See what news you find in Pinewood before making any permanent decisions." Owen nodded, accepting this compromise. One day at a time it is. The days at the cabin fell into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. Owen taught Cordelia how to set snares for rabbits and how to identify edible plants in the surrounding forest. In return, she tended the garden, cooked their meals, and mended Owen's clothes, which showed signs of a bachelor's indifferent care. They talked little of the past, focusing instead on the present, the day's tasks, observations about the weather, small discoveries in the wilderness around them. But in the evenings, as they sat before the fire, Cordelia found herself opening up bit by bit. She told Owen about her childhood in Missouri, about her gentle father who had died of influenza when she was 12, and her mother who had remarried Winston Tate out of desperate need for financial security. She spoke of the early years, when Winston had merely been cold and distant, and then of the change after her mother's death, how his true nature had emerged like a venomous snake uncoiling. Owen listened without judgment, his quiet anger on her behalf more healing than pity would have been. In turn, he shared more of his own story, his upbringing in Pennsylvania, his decision to fight for the Union despite his family's Southern sympathies, and the lonely years after the war when he had drifted west, searching for a place where his past couldn't find him. "I understand why you shot him," Owen said one night, after Cordelia had described a particularly brutal beating Winston had given her for burning his dinner. "Any person with an ounce of decency would." "The law might not see it that way," Cordelia replied. "Women have hanged for less." "The law isn't always just," Owen said, his voice hardening. "Men make laws to protect men, but right and wrong exist outside of courtrooms." His conviction was both comforting and frightening. Comforting because it validated what she had always felt, that her actions, while extreme, had been justified. Frightening because it reminded her how precarious her situation remained. On the 7th day, Owen prepared to ride to Pinewood. "I'll be back by tomorrow evening," he promised, checking his saddlebags one last time. "There's plenty of food and you know how to use this." He handed her a revolver, smaller than his own but well-maintained. Cordelia took it, the weight familiar after the lessons Owen had given her over the past days. "I'll be fine," she assured him, though the thought of being alone again filled her with unease. "Just be careful." "Always am," he replied with the ghost of a smile. Then, unexpectedly, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for just a moment against her cheek. "Lock the door after I leave." Cordelia watched him ride away until he disappeared among the trees, her heart beating an unfamiliar rhythm. The touch had been brief, almost casual, yet it left her skin tingling and her thoughts in turmoil. Alone in the cabin, she threw herself into work to keep her mind occupied cleaning, mending, preparing vegetables for the next day's meals. As darkness fell, she built up the fire and tried to read one of the few books Owen kept at the cabin, but her attention kept wandering to the window, straining to hear hoofbeats that wouldn't come until the next day. She slept poorly that night, haunted by dreams of Winston rising from the dead, of Sheriff Davis finding the cabin, of Owen lying dead on a dusty street. She woke before dawn, exhausted but unable to return to sleep. The day stretched endlessly before her. By noon, Cordelia had exhausted her list of tasks and found herself pacing the small cabin, counting the hours until Owen's expected return. It was then that she heard the distant sound of approaching horses, more than one. Fear shot through her like lightning. Owen had gone alone and wouldn't return with companions. She grabbed the revolver from where she had kept it close at hand and moved to the window. Carefully peering out from the edge, 3 riders approached the cabin, moving with the confidence of men who knew where they were going. As they drew closer, Cordelia could make out the glint of a badge on the lead rider's chest. Sheriff Davis had found her. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but Cordelia forced it down. She couldn't run. The cabin was in a small valley with only one obvious path out, and they would see her immediately. Fighting was equally futile. One woman against 3 armed men. Her only hope was deception. Perhaps they didn't know for certain she was here. Perhaps they were just checking the cabin as part of a larger search. Quickly, she hid her few possessions under the bed, arranged her hair to partially conceal her face, and positioned herself near the fireplace, the revolver hidden in the folds of her skirt. If they asked, she would claim to be Owen's sister visiting from back east. The riders reined in before the cabin. Cordelia's heart pounded so loudly she was sure they could hear it outside. "Hello, the cabin," called the sheriff's voice. "Anyone home?" Taking a deep breath, Cordelia opened the door, keeping her expression neutral despite the terror coursing through her. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady to her own ears. Sheriff Davis studied her face intently. He was an older man with a graying mustache and sharp eyes that missed little. "Madam," he said with a nod. "Apologies for the intrusion. I'm Sheriff Davis from Redemption. These are my deputies, Johnson and Malone." "Catherine Lockhart," Cordelia lied, giving her mother's first name. "Is there something wrong, Sheriff? Looking for a fugitive," he replied, watching her closely. "Woman wanted for murder. We received information she might be in this area." "Here," Cordelia feigned surprise. "I haven't seen anyone for days, except my brother Owen, and he's gone to town for supplies." "Owen Lockhart's your brother, is that right?" The sheriff's tone suggested skepticism. "Yes, sir. I'm visiting from St. Louis, needed mountain air for my health." She offered a delicate cough for effect. The younger deputy, Johnson, leaned toward the sheriff. "She does look something like the description, sir," he murmured, not quite quietly enough. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we come in and look around, Miss Lockhart, just to be thorough?" Cordelia's mind raced. Refusing would only increase their suspicion, but allowing them inside risked them finding something that would give her away. "Of course," she said, stepping back from the doorway. "Though I'm afraid the cabin's not very tidy. I wasn't expecting visitors." The sheriff and one deputy entered while the other remained with the horses. Cordelia stood by the fireplace, her hand never far from the hidden revolver, as the men conducted a cursory search of the small space. "When did you say your brother would return?" The sheriff asked, examining the 2 plates drying beside the wash basin. "Tomorrow, most likely," Cordelia replied. "He left yesterday morning. Long trip for supplies," the deputy observed. "Pinewood's a full day's ride," Cordelia countered, silently thanking Owen for having mentioned the town's name. The sheriff nodded, seeming to accept this. His gaze roamed the cabin once more, then settled on Cordelia with uncomfortable intensity. "One more thing, Miss Lockhart," he said slowly. "The woman we're looking for has distinctive marks on her neck. Recent bruising, like someone tried to strangle her. Mind if I ask you to remove that scarf you're wearing?" Cordelia's blood ran cold. The bruises from Winston's final attack had faded to yellowish smudges, but they were still visible, and she had been using the scarf specifically to hide them. I don't see how that's appropriate, Sheriff," she stammered, her composure finally cracking. The sheriff's hand moved to rest on his holstered pistol. "Remove the scarf, madam. That's not a request." Her body shook with fear as the sheriff's words seemed to echo those Winston had spoken so many times, demands wrapped as requests, leaving her no real choice. Her fingers fumbled with the fabric at her throat. "Step away from her, Davis." The voice from the doorway was quiet but carried a lethal edge that froze everyone in the room. Owen stood there, rifle aimed steadily at the sheriff's chest, his expression hard as granite. "Lockhart," the sheriff acknowledged without turning. "Should have known you were involved. Put down the rifle before this gets ugly." "Not going to happen," Owen replied calmly. "Tell your deputy to ease his hand away from his gun or I start shooting." The sheriff signaled to his deputy, who slowly raised his hands. "You're making a mistake, Lockhart. Harboring a fugitive is a serious offense." "The only mistake was yours," Owen said, stepping further into the cabin. "Coming onto my property, threatening a woman under my protection." "She's wanted for murder," the deputy burst out. "Shot her stepfather in cold blood." "Self-defense isn't murder," Owen countered, "and a man who beats a woman deserves whatever he gets." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "That's not for you to decide. The law failed her," Owen interrupted. just like it failed me and countless others. Now here's what's going to happen. You and your deputies are going to leave. You're going to forget you saw Miss Everhart here, and you're going to tell everyone that your search of this area turned up nothing. Or what? The sheriff challenged. Or I'll remind you that I was one of the best sharpshooters in the Union Army, Owen said softly. And there's a lot of wilderness between here and Redemption where 3 bodies might never be found. The threat hung in the air, its weight palpable. Cordelia held her breath, the revolver now openly in her hand, though she wasn't sure when she had drawn it. Finally, the sheriff nodded. We're leaving, but this isn't over, Lockhart. It is if you're smart, Owen replied. Miss Everhart has friends beyond me, people who know the truth about Winston Tate, people who would be very interested in how his stepdaughter was treated if this went to trial. Something flickered in the sheriff's eyes, doubt, perhaps, or calculation. Mount up, Johnson, he ordered. We're done here. Cordelia kept the revolver trained on them as they backed out of the cabin. Owen followed them outside, his rifle never wavering as they mounted their horses. One last thing, Owen called as they prepared to ride away. Spread the word. Anyone who comes looking for Miss Everhart will answer to me, and I won't be as generous the second time. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely did Owen lower his rifle. He turned to find Cordelia in the doorway, the revolver still clutched in her trembling hand. Are you all right? He asked, crossing to her quickly. The weapon clattered to the floor as Cordelia's composure finally shattered. Her body shook with fear and relief and a dozen other emotions she couldn't name. Owen's arms came around her, strong and steady, as sobs tore from her throat. You're safe, he murmured against her hair. I've got you. You're not in that house anymore. You're never going back there. His words, so similar to the first ones he had spoken to her, yet laden with new meaning, broke something open inside Cordelia. She clung to him as years of fear and pain poured out in racking sobs that seemed to come from the very core of her being. Owen held her through it all, one hand cradling her head against his chest, the other a warm weight on her back. He made no attempt to quiet her, understanding instinctively that this release was necessary, perhaps even healing. When her tears finally subsided, Cordelia became aware of their closeness, of the steady beat of Owen's heart beneath her ear, of the gentle way his fingers stroked her hair. She pulled back slightly, embarrassed by her breakdown. I'm sorry, she whispered, wiping at her tear-stained face. I don't usually. Don't apologize, Owen said softly. Not for that, not ever. His eyes held hers, something unspoken passing between them. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he raised a hand to her cheek, brushing away a lingering tear with his thumb. I thought I might be too late, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. When I heard in town that the sheriff had gathered a posse to search the foothills, I rode back as fast as I could. You came back for me, Cordelia said wonderingly. I'll always come back for you, Owen replied simply, as if it were the most natural promise in the world. The certainty in his voice, the tenderness in his touch, they awakened something in Cordelia that she had thought long dead. Before she could second-guess herself, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Owen went still for a heartbeat, then responded with gentle fervor, one hand sliding into her hair as the other drew her closer. It was a kiss born of shared danger and newfound trust, sweet and fierce in equal measure. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since I found you under that mesquite tree, he confessed. A small laugh escaped Cordelia. Even half dead and filthy, even then, he confirmed, smiling. There was something about you, something brave and unbroken despite everything. I don't feel brave, she admitted. Most of the time I'm terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Owen said. It's facing it anyway, and you, Cordelia Everhart, are the bravest person I've ever known. His words warmed her more than she could express. For so long, she had seen herself through Winston's eyes, weak, worthless, deserving of punishment. To be seen differently, to be valued for her strength rather than berated for her perceived failings, was a gift beyond measure. What happens now? She asked, suddenly aware that the confrontation with the sheriff had changed everything. They know I'm here. They know you're helping me. Owen's expression turned thoughtful. We have options. Sheriff Davis might decide it's not worth the trouble to come after you, especially if what I said made him think twice about how a trial might go. But we shouldn't count on that. We could run, Cordelia suggested. Like you said before Arizona, California, somewhere far from here. We could, Owen agreed, or we could fight. Fight, how? By telling the truth, he said. Finding witnesses who knew what Winston was really like, building a case for self-defense. Cordelia shook her head. No one knew. He was careful, never left marks where people could see them. And he was respected in town, a businessman, a church-goer. Men like that always slip somewhere, Owen insisted. They can't help themselves. Someone must have suspected, even if they turned a blind eye. The idea was terrifying, facing not just the law but public scrutiny, having to relive Winston's abuse and defend her actions. Yet there was something appealing about the thought of no longer running, of claiming her truth and demanding justice rather than mercy. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that, Cordelia admitted. Owen took her hands in his. You are, but you don't have to decide right now. We have time to think, to plan. For tonight, let's just be grateful we're both safe. They prepared a simple meal together, the domesticity of the task a soothing counterpoint to the day's tension. As darkness fell, they sat before the fire, Cordelia leaning against Owen's chest, his arm a protective weight around her shoulders. Tell me about your ranch, she said, wanting to think of something beyond danger and decisions. Owen described the land he had purchased 7 years earlier, 200 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, the small herd of cattle he had built up, his plans for expanding. As he spoke, Cordelia could picture it clearly, not just the physical place but the life he had built there. It sounds lovely, she said when he finished. Peaceful. It is, Owen agreed, or it could be with the right company. The implication hung between them, delicate but unmistakable. Cordelia tilted her head to look up at him, finding his gaze already on her, warm and questioning. Owen, she began, uncertain how to express the tangle of emotions within her. I don't want you to feel obligated, I don't, he interrupted gently. Nothing about how I feel for you comes from obligation, Cordelia. But we've only known each other for such a short time, she protested. Owen smiled. Some things don't need time, sometimes you just know. His expression grew more serious, but I understand if you need time. After everything you've been through, rushing into anything would be foolish. His understanding only made Cordelia more certain of her own feelings. This man, who had saved her life and then respected her enough to give her space and choices, was unlike anyone she had ever known. I don't need more time to know how I feel, she said softly. I'm just afraid that what I've been through has damaged me in ways I don't even understand yet, afraid that I'll disappoint you. You could never disappoint me, Owen said, his voice fervent. And as for damage, we all have scars, Cordelia. Mine may not be as visible as yours, but they're there. We heal together day by day. His words broke down the last of her resistance. Cordelia reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. I think I'm falling in love with you, Owen Lockhart, she whispered, and that terrifies me more than any posse. Owen turned his head to kiss her palm. Being afraid just means you have something worth losing, he said. And I promise you, Cordelia Everhart, I will spend every day making sure you never regret taking this chance. This time when they kissed, it was with the certainty of a decision made. Whatever came next, whether running or fighting, they would face it together. The following morning brought clear skies and a sense of purpose. Over breakfast, they outlined their plan. The sheriff will expect us to run, Owen said. So instead, we'll go to Pinewood and speak with Judge Harmon. He's a fair man, known for his independence from the territorial governor's office. Will he listen? Cordelia asked doubtfully. He will, Owen assured her, especially with the evidence we'll gather along the way. Evidence? What evidence? We'll stop in Willow Creek first, Owen explained. Talk to people who might have suspected what Winston was doing. The doctor who treated your injuries, neighbors who might have heard something, even the undertaker who prepared his body. The thought of returning to the town where Winston's influence had been so pervasive filled Cordelia with dread, but she recognized the logic in Owen's plan. If they were to build a case for self-defense, they needed witnesses and testimonies. All right, she agreed finally. But we need to be careful. Sheriff Davis might have sent word to look out for us. We'll approach cautiously, Owen promised. And if things look too dangerous, we can always revert to our original plan and keep heading west. They packed their few belongings and prepared the horses, leaving the cabin as they had found it. As they rode away from the small valley that had been their sanctuary, Cordelia felt a curious mixture of fear and determination. For the first time since pulling the trigger on Winston's pistol, she was choosing to face what had happened rather than flee from it. The journey to Willow Creek would take 3 days at a steady pace. They traveled carefully, avoiding the main trails and camping in secluded spots each night. Under different circumstances, Cordelia might have found the journey romantic, sleeping beneath the stars, sharing quiet conversations by the campfire, exchanging increasingly tender touches as their new relationship blossomed. But the specter of what awaited them in Willow Creek cast a shadow over even their most intimate moments. Each mile brought them closer to confronting not just the law but Cordelia's past. "Tell me about him," Owen said on their second night as they sat beside the fire. "Not the abuse, you've told me enough about that. Tell me who Winston Tate was to the rest of the world." Cordelia considered the question. "He owned the general store in Willow Creek, came to town about 15 years ago, built the business from nothing. People respected him for that, for his work ethic and business sense. He was generous to the church, always had candy for the children who came into the store. And your mother, how did she meet him?" "She was a widow with a 12-year-old daughter and a failing farm," Cordelia replied, the old pain evident in her voice. "Winston offered security, respectability. He was charming in those days, or knew how to appear so. It wasn't until after they married that his true nature began to show, and even then, only in private." "When did your mother die?" Owen asked gently. 4 years ago. Fever, officially, but..." Cordelia paused, old suspicions rising. She had been ill for some time, growing weaker. "The doctor prescribed medicine, but Winston controlled it, said it was too expensive to waste. I often wondered." She couldn't finish the thought, but Owen understood. "You think he might have hastened her end?" "I don't know," Cordelia admitted. But she declined so rapidly at the end, and he seemed more relieved than grieved when she passed. Owen's expression darkened. "The doctor might remember details about your mother's illness. It could be relevant to our case, establish a pattern of Winston's behavior." The possibility that her mother's death might not have been natural added a new dimension to Cordelia's determination. If Winston had indeed hastened her mother's end, bringing that truth to light would be justice not just for herself, but for the gentle woman who had loved her. They reached Willow Creek at dusk on the 3rd day, approaching from the north to avoid being seen from the main road. The small town, little more than a cluster of buildings surrounding a dusty main street, looked unchanged, yet Cordelia viewed it with new eyes. What had once been her prison was now a battlefield where she would fight for her freedom. "We'll need a place to stay," Owen said as they observed the town from a hillside. "Somewhere discreet." "Mrs. Holloway," Cordelia suggested. "She has a small boarding house at the edge of town. She was kind to me when things were bad. She might help us." Owen nodded. "We'll go there after dark. For now, let's wait and watch." As night fell, they made their way carefully to the boarding house, a modest 2-story structure set apart from the main part of town. A light burned in the downstairs window, and smoke curled from the chimney. Cordelia hung back as Owen knocked on the door. After a moment, it opened to reveal an older woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes that widened in surprise at the sight of her visitor. "Mrs. Holloway." Owen inquired politely. "I apologize for the late hour, but we're in need of lodging and discretion." The woman's gaze moved past Owen to where Cordelia stood in the shadows. Recognition dawned in her eyes. "Cordelia," she gasped. "Child, is that you?" Cordelia stepped forward, her heart racing. "Yes, Mrs. Holloway. I'm sorry to come to you like this, but inside, quickly," the older woman interrupted, ushering them through the door. "The whole town's been talking about you. Sheriff's men were here just yesterday, asking questions." Once inside, Mrs. Holloway embraced Cordelia tightly. "Oh, my dear girl, when I heard what happened, I prayed you had gotten far away, but part of me is glad you've come back. You don't think I'm a murderer?" Cordelia asked uncertainly. Mrs. Holloway's expression hardened. I think you did what you had to do. That man was a monster wearing a respectable face. I knew it, though I couldn't prove it. Her ready acceptance nearly brought Cordelia to tears. Owen, sensing her emotion, placed a supportive hand on her back. Mrs. Holloway, I'm Owen Lockhart. He introduced himself properly. I've been helping Cordelia since she left town. We've come back to gather evidence for a self-defense plea. The older woman nodded approvingly. A brave decision, and a right one, I think. There are others in town who suspected what was happening who might speak up now that Winston is gone and can't retaliate. Who? Cordelia asked, hope kindling within her. Dr. Monroe, for one, Mrs. Holloway replied. He treated you too many times for accidents not to have had his suspicions. And Sarah from the dressmaker's shop, she mentioned to me once about bruises she'd seen when fitting you for a dress. Owen and Cordelia exchanged glances. It was more than they had dared hope for potential witnesses who could corroborate the abuse Cordelia had suffered. We'll need to speak with them discreetly, Owen said, without alerting Sheriff Davis or his deputies. You can stay here, Mrs. Holloway offered immediately. I have a room at the back of the house that I don't rent out. No one will know you're here. Her generosity overwhelmed Cordelia. Why are you willing to risk so much for me? Mrs. Holloway's eyes grew distant. Because 30 years ago I was you, she said softly. Only I didn't find the courage to end it until my husband had nearly beaten me to death. No one helped me then, but I can help you now. The simple explanation cemented Cordelia's resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, but for every woman who had suffered in silence, for every victim of violence hidden behind closed doors. That night, in the small back room of Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, Cordelia and Owen refined their plan. They would spend 2 days in Willow Creek, gathering testimonies and evidence. Then they would travel to Pinewood to speak with Judge Harmon, hopefully securing some form of legal protection before Sheriff Davis could act against them. It's risky, Owen acknowledged, but if we succeed, you won't have to spend your life looking over your shoulder. And if we fail? Cordelia asked, voicing the fear they both shared. Owen took her hands in his. Then we run together, as far as we need to go. His certainty, his unwavering commitment to her cause, filled Cordelia with a new kind of strength. Whatever happened, she was no longer alone, no longer the frightened girl who had endured Winston's cruelty in solitary suffering. The next morning, Owen set out to speak with Dr. Monroe while Cordelia remained hidden at the boarding house. Mrs. Holloway brought her breakfast and sat with her, sharing stories of the town's happenings during Cordelia's absence. Winston's funeral was a sparse affair, the older woman reported with grim satisfaction. For all his supposed standing in the community, few genuinely mourned him. There were whispers, people wondering if what happened was really as straightforward as the sheriff claimed. What is the sheriff saying? Cordelia asked. That you murdered Winston in his sleep for his money and fled, Mrs. Holloway replied. But some folks aren't convinced. Winston's temper was known to those who dealt with him in business. And there were incidents over the years. Times when he was less careful about keeping his true nature hidden. This news gave Cordelia hope. Perhaps the town's perception of Winston wasn't as uniformly positive as she had believed. Perhaps there were others who had seen glimpses of the monster behind the mask. Owen returned around midday, his expression cautiously optimistic. Dr. Monroe will help, he reported. He's kept records of your injuries over the years, patterns that no series of accidents could explain. He's willing to testify if needed. He suspected. Cordelia asked, a mixture of relief and old hurt in her voice. Why didn't he say something? He says he tried in his way, Owen replied gently. Asked you questions you wouldn't answer, offered help you couldn't accept. He regrets not being more direct, but he feared making your situation worse if Winston knew someone was asking questions. It was a feeble excuse, but Cordelia understood the complex web of social expectations and professional boundaries that might have constrained the doctor. At least now he was willing to stand with her. There's more, Owen continued. The doctor treated your mother in her final illness. He believes Winston may have been withholding her medication or or administering more than the prescribed dose to hasten her decline. Cordelia closed her eyes, the confirmation of her suspicions bringing both pain and validation. "He killed her," she whispered, "just as surely as if he'd used a gun." "The doctor can't prove it," Owen cautioned. "But his suspicions, combined with the pattern of abuse against you, build a compelling case for self-defense." That afternoon, Sarah from the dressmaker's shop visited Mrs. Holloway's house, ostensibly to deliver some mending but actually to speak with Cordelia. The young woman, only a few years older than Cordelia herself, embraced her with tears in her eyes. "I should have said something," Sarah confessed. "When I saw those bruises during your fittings, I knew they weren't from falls or accidents, but Winston was so influential in town and I was afraid." "It's all right," Cordelia assured her, though part of her wished someone had intervened years earlier. "You're helping now, and that's what matters." Sarah promised to write a statement detailing what she had observed, adding another piece to the case they were building. By evening, they had collected 4 such testimonies, small but significant evidence of Winston's true nature and the danger Cordelia had faced. The undertaker's account proved particularly valuable. He had noted unusual bruising on Cordelia's mother's body, before burial bruising inconsistent with natural death from fever. He had dismissed it at the time, but in light of Winston's death and the emerging pattern of abuse, he now viewed it as potentially significant. "We have enough," Owen said that night as they reviewed the statements they had gathered. "Maybe not for a full acquittal in a formal trial, but certainly enough to convince Judge Harmon to issue a ruling of self-defense that would protect you from prosecution." Cordelia nodded, exhausted but hopeful. "Then we leave for Pinewood tomorrow, at first light," Owen confirmed. "The sooner we speak with the judge, the better." They were preparing for bed when a soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Holloway entered, her expression grave. "There's trouble," she said quietly. "Sheriff Davis just rode into town with 2 deputies. They're searching houses on the north side, working their way through town." Owen and Cordelia exchanged alarmed glances. Their time had run out sooner than expected. How did they know to look here? Cordelia asked, panic rising in her voice. "Someone must have seen us arrive or recognized me in town today," Owen surmised. "We need to leave now," Mrs. Holloway nodded. "The back door leads to an alley. From there, you can reach the stables without being seen from the main street." "I'll delay them if they come here." "We can't ask you to lie to the sheriff," Cordelia protested. "You're not asking, child, I'm offering." The older woman's determination was clear. "Now go quickly, and may God go with you both." With hurried thanks and promises to send word when they were safe, Owen and Cordelia gathered their belongings and slipped out the back door. The night was moonless, providing welcome cover as they made their way through the shadowy alleys of Willow Creek. They had just reached the stables when shouting erupted from the direction of the boarding house. Lantern light bobbed in the darkness, the search party moving with new urgency. "They know we're here," Owen whispered, quickly saddling their horses. "We'll have to ride hard." They mounted in haste and rode out the back of the stable, keeping to the unlit side streets until they reached the edge of town. Just as they were about to spur their horses into a gallop, a voice rang out behind them. "Halt, sheriff's office." Owen turned to see a deputy leveling a rifle at them. Without hesitation, he drew his revolver and fired a warning shot that sent the man diving for cover. It bought them precious seconds to urge their horses into a run, racing away from Willow Creek with the sounds of pursuit not far behind. For hours they rode hard, using every trick Owen knew to cover their trail-crossing streams, doubling back, splitting up briefly only to reunite at predetermined landmarks. By dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and their pursuers, but the danger was far from past. "They'll expect us to head for the mountains again," Owen said as they paused to rest the horses. "So instead, we'll go straight to Pinewood. It's our best chance now," Cordelia nodded, too exhausted for argument. The night's flight had drained her, bringing back the terror of her initial escape from Winston's house. But this time, she wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. They traveled through the day, avoiding roads and settlements, pushing on despite fatigue. By nightfall, They had reached the outskirts of Pinewood, a town somewhat larger than Willow Creek, with a courthouse that served the entire county. "We can't go straight to the judge," Owen said as they made camp in a secluded grove. "Sheriff Davis might have sent telegrams ahead to alert the local law. We need to find an ally here first." "Who?" Cordelia asked, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Owen was thoughtful. "There's a lawyer in town, Richard Bennett. He helped me with the paperwork when I bought my ranch. He's a decent man, believes in justice over technicalities. He might be willing to approach the judge on our behalf." It was a slim hope, but better than none. They spent an uneasy night in their hidden camp, taking turns keeping watch. In the morning, Owen would go into town alone to find Bennett, while Cordelia remained hidden. As they sat by their small, carefully shielded fire, the gravity of their situation pressed heavily upon them. They had evidence to support Cordelia's case, but no guarantee it would be enough. The law, with all its imperfections, still held the power to destroy their lives. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Cordelia said softly, "I want you to know that meeting you has been the one good thing to come from all of this." Owen reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "Nothing that happens tomorrow changes what I feel for you, Cordelia. Whether we win this fight or have to start new lives somewhere far from here, we'll be together." "How can you be so certain?" she asked. "You've given up so much already, your ranch, your reputation." "I can't ask you to sacrifice everything. You're not asking, I'm choosing." Owen's voice was firm. "Some things matter more than land or reputation. Some people are worth any sacrifice." In the flickering firelight, his eyes held hers with unwavering certainty. Cordelia felt something shift within her, the last of her doubt giving way to a bone-deep conviction that whatever lay ahead, this man would stand beside her through it all. She moved closer, nestling against his side as his arm came around her shoulders. Despite the danger surrounding them, despite the uncertain future, Cordelia felt a peace she had not known in years. In Owen's embrace, she was no longer defined by what Winston had done to her, but by the strength she had found to survive it. "I love you, Owen Lockhart," she whispered into the quiet night. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And I love you, Cordelia Everhart, no matter what tomorrow brings." Morning came too quickly, dawning clear and bright. They shared a sparse breakfast, then prepared for Owen's journey into town. Cordelia helped him brush down his clothes, removing the dust of travel as best she could so he wouldn't draw undue attention. "Stay hidden," he instructed her. "I'll be back by noon with Bennett if possible, if I'm not back by sunset." "Don't say it," Cordelia interrupted. "You'll be back." Owen nodded, accepting her certainty as a talisman against doubt. He kissed her, a kiss that held both promise and farewell, then mounted his horse and rode toward Pinewood. Alone in the small grove, Cordelia busied herself with small tasks, tending the horses, organizing their meager supplies, reviewing the testimonies they had gathered in Willow Creek. Anything to keep her mind from imagining all the things that might go wrong in town. The sun climbed higher. Noon came and went with no sign of Owen. Cordelia's anxiety grew with each passing hour. Had he been recognized, arrested? Was Sheriff Davis already in Pinewood, waiting for just such an opportunity? By mid-afternoon, she was pacing the small clearing, unable to sit still. Every sound from the direction of town made her heart leap, only to sink again when it proved to be nothing. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon. As shadows lengthened across the grove, Cordelia's fear crystallized into resolve. If Owen had been captured, she would not abandon him. She would go into town herself, surrender if necessary, but ensure that their evidence reached Judge Harmon. She was saddling her horse when she heard hoofbeats approaching, more than one horse. Grabbing the revolver Owen had insisted she keep, Cordelia positioned herself behind a large tree, ready to defend herself if necessary. 3 riders entered the clearing. The first was Owen, his expression grim but determined. Behind him rode an older man in a well-cut suit, presumably Richard Bennett, and a third man whose bearing and stern countenance suggested authority. Cordelia stepped out cautiously, revolver lowered but still in hand. "Owen, it's all right," he called. "This is Richard Bennett and Judge Harmon. They've agreed to hear our case here, away from prying eyes." Relief washed over Cordelia, so intense it nearly buckled her knees. She tucked the revolver into her belt and moved forward to greet the men as they dismounted. Judge Harmon was older than she had expected, with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes that seemed to look straight through her. He nodded curtly as Owen made introductions. "Miss Everhart," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Mr. Lockhart has made some serious claims on your behalf. I've agreed to hear your account directly, along with whatever evidence you've gathered." "Thank you, Your Honor," Cordelia replied, summoning her courage. "I appreciate your willingness to listen." Bennett, a slender man with shrewd eyes and a compassionate smile, stepped forward. "I've reviewed the statements Mr. Lockhart brought to my office. They present a compelling case for self-defense, but we'll need your testimony to complete the picture." They settled around the small campfire as dusk fell. An unusual court convened in the wilderness. Judge Harmon sat on a fallen log, his face impassive as Bennett spread out the written testimonies they had gathered in Willow Creek. "Begin at the beginning, Miss Everhart," the judge instructed. "Leave nothing out." So Cordelia told her story, all of it, from her mother's marriage to Winston through years of escalating abuse, the suspicious circumstances of her mother's death, and finally the night when Winston's rage had nearly killed her. She spoke steadily, her voice gaining strength as she recounted the moment when she had taken his pistol and fired the shot that ended his life. Throughout her testimony, Owen remained beside her, his presence a silent support. Judge Harmon listened without interruption, his expression giving nothing away. Bennett occasionally asked a clarifying question, but mostly allowed Cordelia's story to unfold in her own words. When she finished, silence hung over the clearing, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the soft hooting of an owl in the distance. "Dr. Monroe's records support Miss Everhart's account of repeated injuries," Bennett said finally, indicating one of the statements. "As does the undertaker's observation of unusual bruising on her mother's body. Sarah Miller's testimony confirms that Miss Everhart regularly bore marks consistent with physical abuse." Judge Harmon nodded slowly, his eyes still on Cordelia. "Why didn't you seek help from the law, Miss Everhart?" "Sheriff Davis is sworn to protect all citizens." "Sheriff Davis and Winston were friends," Cordelia replied. "They hunted together, drank together. The one time I tried to speak with him about difficulties at home, he told me it was a private matter between husband and wife. That I should try harder to be a good daughter." The judge's expression darkened at this, a flicker of anger crossing his face before he mastered it. "I see." He was silent for a long moment, reviewing the testimonies before him with careful attention. Bennett exchanged a glance with Owen, who remained tense beside Cordelia, his hand finding hers in the growing darkness. Finally, Judge Harmon looked up. "Based on the evidence presented, and your testimony, Miss Everhart, I find that your actions on the night in question constitute justifiable homicide in self-defense. I will issue a formal ruling to that effect, which will protect you from prosecution in this territory." Cordelia felt light-headed with relief, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. "Thank you, Your Honor," she managed. "However," the judge continued, his tone grave, "Sheriff Davis may not accept this ruling without protest. He has considerable influence with the territorial governor who could potentially overrule my decision." "What do you suggest?" Owen asked, his grip on Cordelia's hand tightening. "Time," Judge Harmon replied. "Distance from the events in question. A year or two from now, with Winston Tate in his grave and new matters occupying the governor's attention, this case will lose its urgency." "You're suggesting we leave the territory," Cordelia said slowly. The judge nodded. "Temporarily, at least. Mr. Bennett can manage your affairs in your absence, Mr. Lockhart, and my ruling will stand as a legal shield should you choose to return later." It wasn't the complete exoneration they had hoped for, but it was more than Cordelia had dared to expect: official recognition that she had acted in self-defense, protection from immediate prosecution, and a path forward, however winding. "We'll go to California," Owen decided, looking to Cordelia for confirmation. "I have a cousin in Sacramento who's been asking me to join his ranching venture for years." Cordelia nodded, the future suddenly opening before her, a future free from fear, with the man she loved by her side. "California," she agreed softly. Judge Harmon signed the official ruling by firelight, his signature bold and clear at the bottom of a document that would change Cordelia's life. Bennett promised to file it with the court in the morning and to discreetly manage Owen's ranch in his absence. "Travel safely," the judge said as he and Bennett prepared to leave. "And remember, Miss Everhart, justice may be imperfect, but it exists for those with the courage to seek it." With those parting words, the two men rode back toward Pinewood, leaving Owen and Cordelia alone in the clearing. For a long moment, they sat in stunned silence, the magnitude of what had just occurred slowly sinking in. "It's over," Cordelia whispered finally. "It's really over, not over," Owen corrected gently. "Just beginning. Our life together, it starts now." He drew her into his arms, and Cordelia felt the last of her fear dissolve, replaced by a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. For the first time since her mother's death, she was truly free of Winston's cruelty, free of the law's pursuit, free to love and be loved without reservation. "California," she said, testing the word, feeling its promise on her tongue. "How soon can we leave?" Owen laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Eager, are you? We can start west tomorrow if you'd like." "Tomorrow," Cordelia agreed, then hesitated. "But first, there's something I'd like to do." The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect September day in the Texas Hill Country. Cordelia stood before Richard Bennett's desk in his Pinewood office, her hand steady as she signed the marriage license before her. Owen's signature joined hers, his normally bold handwriting unusually careful on this most important of documents. Bennett and his wife served as witnesses, their smiles warm as they congratulated the newly wedded couple. It was a simple ceremony, without fanfare or celebration beyond the shared joy of those present. But for Cordelia, now Cordelia Lockhart, it was perfect, a quiet affirmation of the love that had blossomed from the ashes of her old life. "Mrs. Lockhart," Owen said as they emerged from Bennett's office, testing the sound of her new name. "It suits you." Cordelia smiled up at him, her heart fuller than she had ever thought possible. "Yes," she agreed, "I believe it does." They left Pinewood that afternoon, riding west toward a future neither could have imagined just weeks before. The road to California would be long, with challenges and adventures neither could foresee. But they would face them together, strengthened by what they had already overcome. As Texas fell away behind them, Cordelia cast one final glance over her shoulder at the land that had witnessed both her greatest suffering and her most profound liberation. Then she turned her face toward the setting sun, toward California, and the promise of a new beginning. "No more looking back," Owen said, noting her gesture. Cordelia nodded, spurring her horse forward to ride beside him rather than behind. "No more fear," she agreed, "only forward together." And as they rode into the golden light of afternoon, Cordelia felt the final shadows of Winston's house fall away. She was not in that house anymore, would never be again. The road before her was open and bright, leading to a future she was finally free to embrace with both hands.